In this episode, we examine one of the most credible UFO encounters ever recorded, when a police officer in New Mexico came face to face with a landed craft and two unknown figures. But that wasn't the only encounter that day. From a farmer who claimed to speak with visitors, to a 2-day close encounter in the Australian outback, and a strange examination on a quiet hillside in Puerto Rico. Welcome to Strange Encounters. On April 24, 1964, in the desert just outside Socorro, New Mexico, a routine police call turned into one of the most carefully documented UFO encounters on record. The witness was Lonnie Zamora, a local police officer with several years of experience on the force. By all accounts, he was considered reliable, practical, and not someone prone to exaggeration. At approximately 5:45 p.m., Zamora was on patrol when he spotted a car speeding through town. He began pursuit, focusing on the vehicle ahead as it moved toward the outskirts of Socorro. The situation was routine until something else drew his attention. He heard a loud, roaring sound. Almost immediately after, he noticed a flame in the distance. It was bluish at its base, shifting to orange as it rose. The combination of sound and flame suggested something unusual and possibly dangerous. Zamora made a quick decision. He broke off the pursuit and turned toward the source, believing there may have been an explosion, possibly involving a dynamite shack located in that area. He drove off the main road and onto a rough dirt track leading toward a shallow gully. As he moved closer, he slowed his vehicle and began scanning the area ahead. At first, he thought he saw a car. The object appeared light in color and was positioned low in the terrain. Given the uneven ground, it was possible that a vehicle had overturned or crashed. But as he approached, the shape became clearer, and it did not match anything he recognized. Resting in the gully was a smooth, metallic object. Zamora later described it as oval or egg-shaped, with a bright aluminum white finish. It appeared solid with no visible seams, rivets, or structural features that would indicate conventional construction. He estimated its size at roughly 15 to 20 feet in length and approximately 10 to 15 feet in height. On the side of the object, he observed a marking. It was a red symbol, sharp and geometric. Zamora described it as resembling an arrow or an inverted V with additional lines. He would later reproduce the symbol from memory, and while minor variations appeared in different sketches, the general form remained consistent. Near the object, he saw two figures. They were small, either small adults or possibly large children. Both were dressed in what appeared to be white or light-covered coveralls. The clothing looked smooth and uniform, without visible seams, buttons, or separate pieces. Zamora could not make out any clear facial features, but the figures appeared human in shape, with arms, legs, and upright posture. He watched. At least one of the figures seemed to notice him. There was a brief moment of recognition. Zamora later described it as the figure turning toward him, possibly startled. There was no visible attempt at communication, no gestures, just a short, silent acknowledgement that he was there. Zamora brought his vehicle to a stop and stepped out. He began moving toward the object on foot. The distance between him and the craft was not great, close enough for him to observe details clearly, but still far enough that he approached cautiously. The area was quiet aside from the earlier sound he had heard. Then, very quickly, the situation changed. The two figures moved toward the object and disappeared from view. Zamora did not see any door or opening, and he could not determine how they entered the craft. One moment they were visible, the next they were gone. Almost immediately after, he heard the roaring sound again. It started suddenly and grew in intensity. From beneath the object, a flame appeared, blue at its base, extending downward and shifting to orange at the edges. The sound was loud and forceful, enough to cause Zamora to react instinctively. He turned and moved quickly back toward his patrol car, using it for partial cover as the noise increased. The object began to rise. At first, it lifted slowly, ascending just a few feet above the ground. It hovered briefly, maintaining a steady position while the flame continued beneath it. Then, as it cleared the edge of the gully, it began to move horizontally. The motion was smooth and controlled. Within seconds, the object accelerated, the roaring sound diminished as it gained distance, and then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. Zamora remained at the scene for a moment, taking in what had just happened. Then he returned to his vehicle and radioed the incident in. His report was immediate and direct. He described the object, the figures, the sound, and the flame. Another officer, Sergeant Chavez, responded to the call and arrived at the location shortly afterward. By the time he arrived, the object was gone, but Zamora was still there, visibly shaken. Together, they examined the area. What they found would become one of the most important aspects of the case. In the ground where the object had been, there were 4 distinct impressions. They were arranged in a pattern that suggested landing supports. Each mark pressed into the soil with enough force to leave a clear indentation. The soil in these areas appeared compacted, as though it had supported significant weight. Nearby vegetation showed signs of damage. Several bushes were scorched, with leaves and branches blackened or burned. Some stems appeared broken or bent, as if they had been subjected to heat and downward force at the same time. The damage was localized, concentrated in the area directly beneath and around where the object had hovered. There were no signs of debris, no fragments of metal, no evidence of conventional aircraft materials, nothing that could be easily identified or traced to a known source. The incident quickly drew attention beyond the local level. The United States Air Force, through Project Blue Book, opened an official investigation. Given the nature of the sighting and the presence of physical traces, the case was treated with a higher level of seriousness than many others reported at the time. Among those who examined the case was J. Allen Hynek, who served as a scientific advisor to the Air Force. Hynek interviewed Zamora and reviewed the available evidence. His assessment was measured but notable. He found Zamora to be a credible and sincere witness. There was no indication of fabrication and no obvious motive for a hoax. The physical evidence at the site, while limited, was consistent with Zamora's account. Other investigators reached similar conclusions. While various explanations were proposed, including experimental aircraft or misidentified equipment, none were able to fully account for all aspects of the incident. The combination of a close-range observation, a trained witness, and physical traces on the ground made the case difficult to dismiss. Ultimately, the incident was classified as unidentified. In the years that followed, Lonnie Zamora did not seek attention for what he had experienced. In fact, he became increasingly reluctant to discuss it. Those who knew him stated that he stood by his account, but preferred not to revisit the details publicly. That consistency and that reluctance has often been noted as part of what gives the case its lasting weight. The Socorro Encounter remains one of the most referenced UFO cases, not because it offers clear answers, but because it presents a straightforward sequence of events that resists simple explanation. A trained observer, a close encounter, physical evidence left behind, and an official investigation that could not determine what had been seen. But there is one additional detail that places this incident in a broader context. Earlier that same day, nearly 10 hours before Zamora's sighting in New Mexico, another encounter was reported in a rural area near Tioga City, New York. The witness in that case was a dairy farmer named Gary Wilcox. He also described an egg-shaped object. He also reported seeing small, human-like figures nearby. But beyond those similarities, the details of his experience would take a very different direction. Unlike Zamora, Wilcox claimed that the figures spoke to him, and what they said would introduce a set of details that are much harder to reconcile. On the morning of April 24th, 1964, nearly 10 hours before a police officer in New Mexico would report a close-range encounter with an unidentified craft, another sighting was taking place in a rural field in New York State. The witness was Gary Wilcox, a dairy farmer working on his land near Tioga City, not far from the town of Owego. It was sometime between 9:30 and 10 a.m. Wilcox had been spreading fertilizer and decided to walk over to a separate field about a mile from his barn to check the condition of the ground before beginning plowing. The area was quiet, bordered by woods, and there was nothing unusual about the morning up to that point. As he approached the field, something caught his attention. Sitting on the ground ahead of him was a metallic object. At first, he assumed it was something ordinary, possibly a discarded refrigerator or perhaps a piece of equipment that had been left behind. From a distance, its shape and color didn't immediately suggest anything unusual, but as he got closer, he realized that it wasn't anything familiar. The object was smooth and egg-shaped. Wilcox estimated it to be roughly 20 feet in length and about 16 feet high. Its surface appeared metallic, solid, and uniform, without visible seams, doors, or external features. It did not resemble farm equipment, aircraft debris, or anything he could easily identify. He approached it cautiously. At one point, he reached out and touched the surface. He later stated that it was not hot. There was no noticeable heat, no vibration, and no sound coming from the object as it sat there in the field. There was no visible opening, no hatch, no landing gear, nothing to indicate how it had arrived or how anything might enter or exit. Then, without warning, two figures appeared. Wilcox did not describe seeing them emerge from the craft. He simply became aware of them standing nearby. They were small, approximately 4 feet in height, and humanoid in form. Each had arms and legs, and both were dressed in what appeared to be seamless clothing. The suits covered them completely, including their heads, forming a kind of hood or helmet that obscured any facial features. There were no visible eyes, no mouth, no distinguishing characteristics. Despite this, the figures began to communicate. Wilcox reported that they spoke to him in clear, understandable English. However, he noted something unusual about their voices. He could not determine that the sound was coming from their heads. Instead, it seemed to originate from their bodies, flat and even, without normal variation in tone. The first thing they told him was simple. They said he should not be alarmed. They also stated that they had spoken to people before. Then they made a claim that would define much of the encounter. They said they were from Mars. Wilcox later admitted that at that moment, he suspected the entire situation might be some kind of prank. The idea seemed unlikely, and the figures themselves did not behave in a way that suggested advanced knowledge or authority. Instead, their focus turned to something very specific. They were interested in fertilizer. Each of the figures carried what Wilcox described as a tray filled with soil. They asked him questions about how fertilizer was used, how it affected crop growth, and what method farmers relied on to improve yield. According to Wilcox, their questions were basic, almost simplistic. They did not appear to have a working understanding of the subject. Despite claiming to grow food on their own planet, they seemed unfamiliar with the fundamentals of soil treatment and agricultural practices. They told him that changes in their environment were creating difficulties for them and that they were attempting to gather information that might help. The conversation continued for several minutes. At times, Wilcox stated that he had difficulty understanding their explanations when the topic shifted to space or their craft. Their statements were vague, and he could not clearly follow what they were describing. They did, however, provide a few additional details. He said that they could only travel to Earth every 2 years. They claimed that they were currently operating in the Western Hemisphere, and they stated that they preferred to land during daylight hours because their craft was less noticeable under those conditions. They also expressed some surprise that Wilcox had been able to see them at all. At one point, they made a comment about human space travel. They suggested that humans would not be successful in traveling through space, stating that the human body would not adapt well to those conditions. Eventually, the interaction came to a close. The figures asked Wilcox if he could provide them with a bag of fertilizer. He agreed and turned to walk back toward his barn to retrieve one. He was gone only a short time, but when he returned to the field, the object and the figures were gone. There was no sound of departure, no visible trace of movement, nothing in the sky. The field was empty. Wilcox later stated that he left a bag of fertilizer at the site. When he returned the following day, he claimed that the bag was no longer there. The incident was reported and eventually came to the attention of civilian UFO research groups, including NICAP. It was also logged by the U.S. Air Force as part of Project Blue Book. Unlike the encounter in Socorro, however, the Wilcox case did not produce physical evidence that could be independently verified. There were no documented landing impressions, no confirmed burn marks or disturbed vegetation, no secondary witnesses who observed the object or the figures. The account relied entirely on Wilcox's description of what he experienced. That does not mean it was dismissed outright. At the time, it was taken seriously enough to be recorded and reviewed. Wilcox himself was described as sincere, and there was no clear indication that he was attempting to deceive anyone. But when the details of the case are placed alongside the events reported in Socorro later that same day, certain differences become difficult to ignore. In Socorro, the witness was a trained police officer responding to what he believed was an emergency. His observation was brief, but it was supported by physical traces on the ground and followed almost immediately by an official investigation. In New York, the encounter was longer, more detailed, and included direct communication, but it left behind no confirmed physical evidence. The figures in Socorro were seen only briefly and made no attempt to interact. In the Wilcox account, the figures engaged in conversation, offering explanations, asking questions, and making claims about their origin. Some of those claims are harder to reconcile. The idea of visitors from Mars, for example, was already becoming difficult to support by 1964, as scientific understanding of the planet had advanced. The descriptions of their knowledge, in particular being unfamiliar with basic agricultural practices, also stand in contrast to the level of technology implied by interplanetary travel. None of these points, on their own, provide a definitive explanation, but taken together, they highlight a difference in how the two cases are generally viewed. One presents a short, structured encounter with physical effects that were examined and documented. The other presents a longer, more conversational experience that depends entirely on a single account, with details that are more difficult to verify. Both were reported on the same day. Both involve similar descriptions of an egg-shaped craft and small humanoid figures, and yet, when considered side by side, they leave very different impressions. It's in that contrast that the distinction between the two becomes most apparent. On the night of June 22, 1977, in the remote wilderness along the Blue River in southwest Queensland, Australia, a lone gold prospector looked up and saw something he could not explain. At around 11 p.m., Albert Smith, not his real name, noticed 3 lights in the sky. They moved silently, slowly, descending toward him with deliberate control. Then they settled, not in the open, but into a clump of trees near his isolated camp. What followed, Albert would later describe as the most incredible 2 days of his life. He watched as figures emerged from the light, not shadows, not shapes, but people. 35 of them. Men and women stepping out from craft he would later describe as towering, nearly 50 meters high, resting on what looked like fire-supported legs. At first glance, they appeared human, but not quite. Their skin carried a blue-gray tone. Their presence was unsettling in ways that were difficult to define. The men wore what Albert described as gray business suits. The women were dressed for summer, despite the near-freezing conditions of the outback night. And among them was one who stood out, a woman who claimed she was 490 years old. Albert said she looked it. Like something preserved, ancient, almost mummified. The group did not rush him. They did not attack. Instead, they stayed for 2 full days. Albert claimed he spoke with them, or at least something like conversation took place. They could speak English, but only in quiet, whispered tones. At the same time, they seemed to communicate without words, using gestures and something more direct. Albert began to notice something disturbing. Before he could finish asking a question, they already seemed to know what he was going to say. He came to believe he was only being allowed to ask certain things, that his thoughts were not entirely his own. "I'm sure they had control of my mind," he later said. "For those 2 days, I think their powers were almost limitless." Only a few of the visitors remained near his camp. The others moved down toward the river, and at one point, the entire group gathered together. What happened next is one of the strangest details in the entire account. They began to play. Albert described hundreds of small balls, floating, moving, alive with energy. Each one seemed to throw out flashes of lightning. The beings interacted with them casually, almost like a game, as if manipulating forces that, to us, would be completely beyond control. Their physical abilities were just as unnatural. Albert claimed they could leap enormous distances, up to 60 meters in a single jump. At one point, he approached one of them, the one who identified himself as the leader, a figure named Baynar. Albert reached out and touched him. He said it did not feel like human skin. It felt like soft rubber, artificial, or something close to it. Despite everything he was witnessing, Albert was never physically harmed. But he was not free, not entirely. When the encounter began to come to an end, the lack of control became impossible to ignore. He wanted to watch them leave, to see the craft rise, to witness proof, but he couldn't move. He described the sensation as if his legs were filled with 200 kilograms of lead. He was forced to remain where he was, unable to follow, unable to act. And then they were gone. No visible departure, No rising craft in the sky, only silence, and one lingering detail. A strong, heavy smell in the air. Kerosene. Nothing else remained. No marks on the ground, no objects, no physical trace, just the memory. But before they left, Baynard told him one final thing. He said he was going to make it rain. A short time later, it began, and according to Albert, it didn't stop for 8 days. This was not the first time something like this had happened to him. Albert claimed the encounter in 1977 was only the latest in a series of events that began years earlier. In the winter of 1973, he reported seeing a fleet of 16 spacecraft hovering over the area before disappearing. In May of the following year, he approached a cigar-shaped craft suspended above the ground. Inside, he saw figures, men in the cockpit, and a woman near one of the windows. Before he could get closer, it shot away in a flash of light. Then in June of 1976, another brilliantly illuminated craft appeared, each encounter becoming more direct, more personal, until finally, in 1977, they stayed for 2 days. Albert never reported the incidents to authorities. He believed no one would accept his story without proof, but he intended to try. He said he would return to the area in February, this time with a camera. He began documenting everything. Even so, he admitted something that lingered beneath the surface of the entire experience. "I am very scared," he said, frightened to go back. But he also believed they had not harmed him before and hoped they wouldn't if he came again. There was no known follow-up, no photographs, no physical evidence, and no confirmation that Albert ever returned to the site. What remains is a single account of an encounter that lasted 2 days in one of the most remote parts of Australia, with no evidence left behind and no way to verify what he claimed to have seen. On September 4th, 1977, at approximately 3:30 in the afternoon, a 70-year-old farmer named Luis Sandoval was resting in a hammock outside his home in Barrio Abra Centro, Puerto Rico. What happened next would become one of the island's more unusual humanoid reports of the 1970s. According to the account later published in El Vocero de Puerto Rico on September 19, 1977, and summarized in the 1978 issue of Flying Saucer Review, Sandoval suddenly felt compelled to get up from his hammock and walk toward a nearby hillside east of his home. He did not report seeing anything at that moment. He simply felt an unexplained urge to move. As he reached the hillside, he heard an explosive sound, like a fireworks rocket. Looking toward the east, he saw a flash of light and a bluish object approaching over a nearby hill. He described it as shaped like a candle or cigar and said the noise increased as it descended. The object came down near him. In a sudden bluish flash, a small humanoid figure appeared directly in front of him. Sandoval estimated the being to be about 3 feet tall. He described its face as round and muddy in color. The nostrils were large and flaring, resembling those of a simian. The ears were long and pointed. The mouth was small, with thick, prominent lips. The figure was dressed in what Sandoval described as a small jacket and tie. The being spoke to him in Spanish in a husky, deliberate voice. It told him to have courage. Hanging around its neck was some kind of implement or device. The being used this object to examine Sandoval, moving it over his feet, knees, chest, back, and temples. The report does not indicate that Sandoval was restrained or physically harmed during this examination. At one point, the being stated plainly that it was an extraterrestrial. After completing the examination, it stepped back several feet and looked around at the surrounding landscape. According to Sandoval, it then remarked, "How nice Puerto Rico is." Moments later, the figure stepped back again and disappeared in a sudden bluish flare, similar to the flash that marked its arrival. The light ascended quickly into the sky and vanished. After the encounter, branches of a nearby avocado tree were reportedly found shriveled and withered as if exposed to intense heat. Sandoval was described as shaken by the experience, although he later stated he was not a bit afraid during the event itself. The case was reportedly investigated by Sebastian Lamarche and others. It was later referenced in Flying Saucer Review in 1978, citing the earlier newspaper coverage. That is the core of the report. There were no additional witnesses mentioned, no publicly available laboratory tests on the damaged tree branches, no photographs included in the summaries that survive today. The account rests entirely on Sandoval's testimony as recorded at the time. Puerto Rico experienced numerous UFO and humanoid reports during the 1970s, and this case fits within that broader wave of activity. The details are straightforward: a descending luminous object, a small humanoid entity, a brief physical examination, a verbal exchange, and a sudden disappearance accompanied by light. Whether the event represents a genuine unexplained encounter, a misinterpretation of natural phenomena, or personal visionary experience cannot be determined from the available information. What remains is a concise, vividly described incident from a quiet hillside in Puerto Rico, one that continues to be cited nearly 5 decades later as part of the island's long and complex UFO history. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with your thoughts. It really helps the channel grow. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next episode of Strange Encounters.